to me, when I look at what the Knicks are doing, this feels like what the Knicks are trying to do to me. Like they're trying to best position themselves for Joel Embiid. And that comes from like no inside information. I want to be very clear about that. But like, to me, that's why you don't give all of your assets for Donovan Mitchell. You don't give all of your assets for some potential deals that occurred this summer. I think that you are hoarding for a player like Joel Embiid. And if he was to hit the market, the Knicks make the most sense to me.
The Knicks make a lot of sense as a team that would be interested, and that could potentially, depending on what the trade partner, in this case the Sixers, are looking for, give them pieces that are potentially useful. Like the Knicks have a lot of players on reasonable contracts, which can be a good thing. Like especially in the light of like, if we're not talking about rookie scale guys who are generally positive value, there aren't always a ton of positive value contracts long term in the league. So the challenge with the Knicks is I think they'll always be in the room, but I think the way that they have the best offer, and this kind of came into play a little bit in the Donovan Mitchell thing. I don't love a lot of their draft assets, so like they kind of they did the volume play rather than the quality play with some of the stuff that they've done, which I mean that can work out really well for you. We've seen teams do it, but like one of the big questions that I have is like, I haven't written on this yet, but it's something I want to do this summer, is this group of teams that are all in the West, of course, that are all really asset rich and are kind of like on different timelines. So I'm talking about New Orleans, I'm talking about Utah, I'm talking about San Antonio, and why am I blanking on the last one? Oklahoma City. The challenge is, are those teams going to get in the bidding, and does the bidding ever really happen? Because we've seen players narrow the field at least a little bit. And we don't know in that case who would be necessarily running the Sixers. My instinct is that it would still be Daryl Morey. But what would they be looking for? What approach would they be doing? But yeah, I mean, I think the Knicks are reasonably well positioned, and they're even better positioned if the disgruntled player in question, whether it's Joel Embiid or somebody else, says, I'm going to narrow the field in half or in a third or whatever else, and the Knicks are probably going to be in that group.
So the reason I also say the Knicks for next offseason particularly is I think there is more value than what people think in current value, in like current timeline picks, because it allows you to rebuild quicker as opposed to like waiting for all these assets that will eventually come, but potentially after you have a job as a general manager, right? The Knicks currently have access to their own 2024. They have access to Dallas's top 10 2024 protected, so probably we'll go through.
Yeah.
They have a future pick from Detroit that is extended out until 2027. And it's top 18 next year, top 13 in 2025, top 11 in 2026, top 9 protected in 2027. So they're probably going to get that Detroit pick at some point. They also have a 2024 from Washington that is top 12 protected this year, top 10 protected in 2025, top 8 protected in 2026. Reasonable chance that transfers at some point as a first and as a lottery pick, I think. So you have these 2024 pick assets that are potentially really like somewhat valuable, let's call them, maybe not like exceptionally valuable, but could realistically all turn into lottery picks outside of, I think, the Dallas one. You also have, I believe, all of your own first rounders. You have a 2025 from Milwaukee, I believe.
They do, unless it's top 4, which we don't expect it to be.
Right. So you have a number of picks that are interesting, I think, to the Knicks or to Philly. And you have all of your own picks that gives them, it's a good blend of current value, which allow you to rebuild sooner for your fan base, and future value, which like if after Joel Embiid does not resign or falls off a little bit in some way, you can try and get that future value as well. And if you're the Knicks, you're probably giving up just about everything you have for Joel Embiid because this is what you've been waiting for. So you could do something like Emmanuel Quickley, the RJ Barrett deal, the Evan Fournier deal. Like if you have him opt in, essentially, that's an expiring deal. Emmanuel Quickley, these 3 2024 first round picks, and then 2 other first round picks. And that's probably more than anybody else is going to offer, would be my guess, right? Like, unless you love the Houston guys, maybe you could give me a case that Houston is a better offer.
With Embiid, there could be other teams that work their way into the conversation. Brooklyn is a potential. They have such a weird combination of stuff because they have all these Phoenix picks, but they also, Mikal Bridges, who, of course, has a history with the Philadelphia 76ers, having been his mother being a part of the organization, having been drafted by them and traded for Zaire Smith. But like there are a couple of other ones that I think could work their way in.
Like there's Oklahoma City could easily do this. Oklahoma City is the team.
The other wild one is New Orleans. Like New Orleans can work their way, as they reportedly did in the 2-3 stuff in the draft. Like they can work themselves into anything if they want to. It's just, do they want to? And so we'd have to wonder that. And then how much does the player fit in? And the other wild factor in all this is like, it does seem like we're in a generally stable time, but players will always shake loose. Like that's the thing that I think we've learned over the last couple of years is like there will always be someone. But Joel Embiid is a phenomenally talented someone, and he's the type of player that a group like the Knicks can prioritize. And the other thing about with New York, and I believe this to be the case, is I don't think they're necessarily building this asset salary matching base and all that for Joel Embiid specifically. However, I think they're building it for a disgruntled star, and Joel Embiid is probably their ideal of that group. But that group could include a number of other guys. And part of what makes the Knicks so fascinating is I think they were probably a lot more interested in Donovan Mitchell before Jalen Brunson was awesome last year. And now, of course, if you can add Donovan Mitchell while not giving up a ton of their stuff, like you do it. Donovan Mitchell is an amazing player. But they can now emphasize different elements of an overall good team to make it work. And so now if you want to go after a wing, if you want to go after a center like Joel Embiid, you don't need the creator now. You have Jalen Brunson is good enough to be that guy. And so that frees them up to identify other targets and work within it. Now, you're dependent on the supply here because the supply is so variable. We think it'll be somebody, but we don't know who that somebody is. So we'll have to see.
So here is now, the other teams that could be in, like obviously I mentioned Oklahoma City. I'm a little bit skeptical Oklahoma City would do this personally because it feels like they are building for the timeline after Joel is out of his prime a little bit to me, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe like Shea would speed that up in some way and some of the other guys on their roster would speed that up in some way. New Orleans, I think actually might be like the prime team that could do this. Houston is another team that like really could do this if they really wanted to. But I think New York would be inclined to offer everything, whereas maybe New Orleans would not offer everything. Maybe Houston would not offer everything. And thus that incentive to offer more and more and more would make it so New York would probably be the team that would offer most at the end of the day, even though they don't have the most to offer.
The other kind of consideration to make is I'm always interested, it doesn't happen very often, in the like talented young team that wouldn't do it through cap space. So like, what if Orlando thinks that they can play Franz Wagner and Paolo and Joel together? And they want something with that. Like they could put together a really strong offer. And we don't usually see those teams. I mean, Orlando has made some big swings in the past, but like we haven't usually seen it go in that direction, but you never know. And like,
you never know.
And Embiid is here's the other one that we have to bring up just because you always should is the Miami Heat. Like, I don't know how it would work with or without Dame, but you know, it's happened before. And
I don't think they actually have an offer that can top anything.
You want my favorite crazy one? If we're gaming this out that it's like a year or two out, Portland. The post Dame Portland Trailblazers put something together. I mean, but good Lord, would you be risking with another 7-footer, unbelievably talented with an injury history in a Trailblazers uniform? As somebody who still has Greg Oden's, his foot and tugging at my heartstrings, it would be challenging. But like the idea basically of you're not going to get anybody better than him. For like there aren't going to be better players traded for a while. And, even if we said that there's going to be the cavalcade of guys just basically every year, You know what we haven't really mentioned anywhere here is anyone who has real top 5 credibility other than like Kevin Durant is kind of his own case, but it's rare. And that's why, we're interested in it. That's why we're talking about it, even though Joel Embiid is miles from making a trade request right now.
Yes.
And here's hoping the Sixers are so good that he never has to. But it is, it is a distinct possibility.
The interesting one for me there on Portland is what happens if they take Dame into the season. The Harden thing becomes such a fucking calamity that Joel asks out and they still have Lillard. And then you can do like shade in a million picks in like Jeremy Grant or whatever you want to do for Joel. And then you have Scoot, you could do Simon's shade in a million picks for Joel or something like that. And maybe that's your interesting move, right? It's still probably not great. It's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. But like, nonetheless, we're getting into hypothetical world.